Sorry, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us.
It says it's streaming live on YouTube. That's what I see on my screen.
Oh, that is my face very large on our YouTube page.
I'm sitting back then.
Allie, do you have people in the waiting room or is there just nobody logged in yet?
No, I have everyone in the waiting room.
Okay, so you just let them in at quarter till. Okay, do you want me, should I wait a minute or do you want to like tell me when to do the intros?
Yeah, so you'll see everyone come into the room. I'm just, I just saw.
I see
There
us.
we go.
We're live now on YouTube on my screen, if that helps.
Yep. Terrific. Can you post a link to that on our Facebook page, please?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, good. Here's Shirley. Once she logs in, I'll give everybody the quick heads up.
Okay. Senior Chief Deluxe, welcome. Oh, you're muted.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bill, over to you. Bill is our communications specialist in the Institute for Politics and Strategy, and he is going to talk a little bit about an article that he's going to write about this panel discussion today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for letting me join this. I'm really excited to be able to sit in on this and to hear everything that you guys have to say. I'm going to be writing a brief article about this event for our university website. It's going to be on our Institute for Politics and Strategy site, and then we're going to promote it on our various social media channels. I wanted to let you know that, but I also wanted to let you know that you all will get to see the article before it goes out. So if there's anything that you would prefer not be included, you can obviously tell me, and I will be happy to make sure it's taken care of. So please speak freely. Don't worry about anything. You will have full editorial control on the back end.
Speak freely, except you're on YouTube, so.
Thank you all.
Yeah, we are streaming this talk. And we are at about time. Does anyone have any questions before I admit everyone from the waiting room?
Let me just say, if I get something wrong, correct me. This is a school. We're used to having a back and forth conversation. So just,
Quick question, actually, who's the audience? Is this just general Carnegie Mellon population, or is this like the poli-sci population?
It's mostly Institute for Politics and Strategy students and faculty, but there are folks from all across the university in attendance. We have some folks from the ROTC program here at Carnegie Mellon and at Pitt, University of Pittsburgh, which is just down the street. So it's a good mix.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to let everyone in. And then Clint, I will cue you for introductions. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We are here today with a very special CIRP policy forum, and I would like to introduce our Institute for Politics and Strategy Federal Executive Navy Fellow, Clint Kristoff.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to virtually welcome this panel for this afternoon for a discussion about women leading Navy technological innovation. We have 5 outstanding panelists with us this afternoon. Captain Ann Casey is an information warfare officer and currently the commanding officer of Navy Cyber Warfare Development Group. Captain Danielle Lukic is an intelligence officer and is the deputy commanding officer and information warfare director at the Navy Special Warfare Development Group. Captain Tracy Hines is an information professional and is currently the commanding officer of Hopper Information Services Center at the Office of Naval Intelligence. Lieutenant Sabrina Reyes Dodds is a submarine officer currently assigned as the Women in Submarines Coordinator for Commander Submarine Forces Atlantic, where they integrated women into the submarine force within only about the last 10 years. Senior Chief Shirley Deluxe is an IT specialist and the Operations Department Chief at Hopper Information Services Center at the Office of Naval Intelligence, where she's also previously served as the command's Senior Enlisted Advisor. Combined, these leaders represent nearly 100 years of naval service. They have led thousands of sailors and operated onboard aircraft carriers, destroyers, amphibious ships, and submarines, as well as with SEAL teams and aviation squadrons. Together, they have countless deployments to every ocean on Earth, as well as into Iraq and Afghanistan. Collectively, they also hold graduate degrees from MIT, Trinity College at Cambridge, England, and the U.S. Naval War College, just to name a few. It's also my pleasure to introduce Professor Carol Goldberg, who will be moderating the panel this afternoon. Professor Goldberg is co-founder with Professor Kyron Skinner of the Women in Social Studies, and is also the executive director of the undergraduate economics program at Tepper School of Business.
Thank you, Commander Christoph. Before we begin our discussion today, I would like to take a moment to thank those who are involved and responsible for supporting this event and bringing us all together. This event is sponsored by the Institute for Politics and Strategy, the Center for International Relations and Politics, the Institute for Strategic Analysis, and Women in the Social Sciences. As this is an event about women leading, I'd like to let the students on this call know about CMU's newly formed chapter of Women in International Security. If you're interested in finding out more about WISE, please get in touch with either Professor Madison Schramm or Ms. Ali Frohmeyer. And finally, I'd like to give thanks to last year's U.S. Navy Federal Executive Fellow, Lieutenant Commander Aaron Kataglu, this year's Federal Executive Fellow, Commander Christoph, Emily Haff, Ali Frohmeyer, Bill Brink, and Institute for Politics and Strategy Taub Professor Kyron Skinner. Before we begin, I'd like to say that this discussion was originally scheduled to take place last March, just about 7 months ago. The questions that I would have asked at that point now seem narrow in scope in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. So what I want to do today, and what I hope to do, is to facilitate a conversation among our distinguished panelists. So I'm going to start off by saying, or trying to characterize, what I believe is the changing face of combat and the uses of technology. So this 5 of you represent what I consider a new paradigm of strategy and leadership, one that relies heavily on the use of technology and data analytics. As I've been preparing for this event, I've done a bit of reading, and it seems to me that for quite a while, combat experience has been sort of a hallmark of loyalty and leadership. And I'm asking if you can talk with us a bit about what leadership looks like today in a world in which combat or operations is about understanding and using data and technology as well as human interaction. And I'm going to start off with asking Captain Casey if she'd be comfortable responding to that.
Sure. I think my initial reaction is I don't know that the leadership itself has changed all that much. I think leadership is all about knowing your people and understanding your mission and figuring out how you get the job done. It's also a lot about being able to communicate, being articulate, being concise, and knowing when you need to take something to your leaders. Having said that, I think if I can relay, when I was an ensign, my qualifications didn't include a lot of cyber as a cryptologic warfare officer. And today my ensigns do require that. So I certainly think technology plays a role, and leaders at all levels have to realize that that's coming, just like any new trend. And if they don't, they're going to be behind the curve on what comes next. In my world, in cyber warfare, we like to say that, we think the next war can be won or lost in nanoseconds. And it's going to depend a lot on how we're prepared to defend our forces in the cyber world, as well as how we're prepared to go forward offensively. And so that is certainly something that did not exist even 10 years ago to the level that it does today. And I think probably something on everybody's mind in the news is the Russian interference in elections. So that's just one good example of how technology has altered where we're going.
Yes, I was wondering, would somebody like to respond to that? Anybody?
Sure, I can certainly talk about information warfare and combat and leadership that requires that experience and that new dimension of warfare. So certainly in my job at Navy Special Warfare Development Group as the N2 and 39 or the Information Warfare Director, that's exactly what we're thinking about. And we're research and development of new tactics and procedures for how to shape the information environment that we work in, and also how to maneuver in that environment. And just like Captain Casey, when I was an ensign and deployed on an aircraft carrier, and we were reacting to the 9/11 strikes, we weren't necessarily thinking about the information domain at the time we were reacting because of the necessity out of combat. 19 years down the road, we have certainly brought in the information domain into our awareness of how combat operations affect that domain and how we can affect the adversary through that domain. So it still requires the same amount of leadership, still requires the same amount of thought process and manpower. And even so, the data analytics part that you mentioned, that's very much in our wheelhouse of trying to collect as much data and be able to synthesize it to give commanders decision space in that domain.
May I ask how you all were trained to determine what is the level of data that you float up to your commanders? How do you determine that? I teach in the business school, and we're constantly asking students to think about what are the most important items to convey, and what's the mindset that you all work within when trying to determine that?
Well, I'll just go and start off. You know, that's a very good question, because there is so much information and there's so much data. So one, you have to understand, what is commander's intent? What is the mission? You know, where are we trying to get to? And then based on where we're trying to get to, what is the actual intent? You say, okay, here's the information that will help you assimilate. Well, you know, am I going in the right direction? Am I meeting the mission? So that's the challenge, is because there's so much information overflow. So you really have to understand the foundational ground. Hey, what is the commander's intent? What is the mission? Okay, now what is relevant? What makes sense to help you kind of figure out what we need, you know, as far as information to get us there to achieve our necessary objectives.
I see. Senior Chief Dulux, do you want to add anything to that, or Lieutenant Reyes-Dodds?
The only thing that I'll add is, for example, like going on mission as a submarine warfare officer, you're constantly collecting intelligence. That's one of our major platforms that we do. So just like Captain Hines said, I think I got that name right. You want to find out what commanders intend and what is the purpose of the mission? What data are you trying to collect? Find out what the big picture is, kind of get your punchline, just in case basically all the data doesn't get across, but you need to get that punchline across. And then find any relevant details that'll help build your story and build the full picture for the admirals to synthesize.
Yes, I was going to say something similar to that, as far as making sure that the people that are providing that data understand the big picture as well as the commander's intent, so that they know exactly what they're collecting, what information they need to push up to leadership, and just making sure that the communication is clear.
So that's really interesting. So what you're saying is that there needs to be a narrative behind the story of the data, and that the narrative is provided from above. Often we think, perhaps in industry, that there's opportunities for entrepreneurial moments to sort of go off script, and if you see a space where one can improve. Does that also exist in your work environments?
Sure, I think it does. And I do think it depends where you are. And I think you have to know your boss. So some bosses receive that better than others. We have something we call bottom line up front. It's probably used throughout industry as well. But it's kind of, as Captain Hines said and Senior Chief said, it's like hitting that high point And you absolutely need to know why your boss would care. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be innovative and give them a new approach or a new way to do things. I think in my command, because we exist in a research and development world, we sort of are pushing that envelope all the time. And in some cases, I can make that decision at my level, but in some cases, I need the admiral to help me make it. And in that case, I need to show to him why this new or innovative way is worth taking a risk on. I absolutely can do it.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just expound, and that's what's exciting. And even at my level, I'll encourage and, you know, innovation, and I call it the stimulating your mind time. You know, show me a different way and how we can get there. But I do want to know, make sure you're answering that so what, so that we know why this is important, because everyone comes up with these great ideas. Then it's like, well, wait a minute, does that really get us there? But definitely still want to encourage that innovative thinking, because oftentimes there's more efficient and effective ways to achieve the objective. So it's still important, even though you have a roadmap, you still want you know, a lot of innovative thoughts and minds and ways to get there.
Right. So when some of us were chatting earlier this week, we had this discussion, and someone pointed out the difference between technical expertise and strategic expertise. And I was wondering if you would comment on that and on the path how one goes from being, let's say, a leader on the more of the technical side to becoming a leader in the strategy side. Is this something that can be learned? Are there leadership programs that teach you these things?
I think senior chief should chime in on that one first.
Yes.
I would always say good mentorship.
Yes.
Good mentorship is what eventually gets you there.
Yes. So it is sometimes it is hard for someone who is more technical to assume the role of being a leader, because they're so engrossed in what they know and what their expertise level is that it's hard for them to sometimes move into that position. So it does take some people some time to adjust to moving from that hands-on to the one actually strategizing and trying to come up with, you know, the plan. In my career, I think I've done that through every level, from moving up through the ranks. For example, me coming from the IT radioman background, we were heavily hands-on, you know, ensuring that we're supplying the communication, you know, for our command as well as other units that depend on services from us. And then slowly I had to move from me being a technical expert to now, you know, my department head, my DIVO relies on my thoughts and ideas on how they can better set up or plan communications.
So, and I'll just add, I think we do have a lot of schools that definitely helps to hone the technical proficiency. And then as you go higher up in the ranks, we try to encourage venues where you do get that up and out thinking, to where you're looking at, you know, a strategy behind it. We use things like, we take a team off site, where sometimes it's the department heads, and we say, okay, now that you know, you're really smart in what you're doing, you've got a lot of great people. Now let's think about where we're trying to get to in the next 5 to 10 years, and really try to mold that good strategic thinking. So I think it morphs over time, but I know I've been afforded at all levels that opportunity to sit in the room and kind of look at things from a, like I said, an up and out view, you know, knowing that I'm the expert on it, but still understanding, hey, this is the bigger picture.
Right. Well, I'd like to sort of, you know, switch focus just for a moment. So last week I had the pleasure of hearing Admiral Michelle Howard speak at Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace and Security. And they had a talk about diversity, inclusion, and national security imperative. And she spoke about many things. And one thing she spoke about was the need to find a career path that allows individuals to move, or more opportunities for individuals to move from enlisted positions to officers. But I'd like to turn our question a little bit around when we think about diversity. And I'm thinking back to what Commander Christoph told me about last week about the history of gender integration on the US Navy submarines. And how the integration process started with bringing on female officers first and then the enlisted women. And I can see that Lieutenant Reyes Dodds knows I'm going to ask her a question. So as I understand, you are one of the first, if not the first female officer on a submarine. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your experience of taking command in a situation where you probably had to learn on the job from your subordinates. And would our other panelists like to comment about their first experiences entering into a command environment that was new to them, and how you learn not from just above the chain, but below that, from below too?
Absolutely. So I'll start with submarines. They made the decision to integrate submarines in 2010. And so the first cohort of women commissioned in 2010, but then reported to their submarines around 2012, just based on the pipeline. So on my submarine specifically, I reported to the Minnesota in 2018. I was actually the second generation of women to show up. And to give everybody a perspective, there were 3 women on board of a crew of 120, and all 3 of us were female officers. But what's kind of simultaneously empowering and also frustrating in that sense is that you essentially define the boundaries for like how the crew interacts with and handles, basically like handles their interactions with women, and what the professional lines are and what they aren't, which is empowering, one, because that gives a lot of responsibility on us to say like, hey, these are the boundaries, and we're setting the boundaries for all the women to come after us, especially as we're starting to integrate enlisted women as well. So one of the major milestones before integrating any enlisted women on a boat is that it must have been integrated with officer women for several years. But what's frustrating about that is it kind of solidifies the fact that, one, you kind of almost subconsciously are defining the boundaries for what can be seen as stereotypes. So for example, on my boat, they automatically assumed that maybe like, I don't want to give too many details to creates the first cohort of women created a stereotype that the second cohort had to break, sure. Unfortunately. Wasn't necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just something that occurs because such a small population or such a small group of individuals represent an entire population to the rest of the majority population. And so what's frustrating about that is it's not about professionalism anymore and just being professional between people. It's being professionals between men and women, and right. What those lines are and what the gender boundaries are. So it's tricky to navigate that and find your way, especially when you don't necessarily have a senior female mentor to turn to and be like, hey, I'm dealing with this issue and I don't know how to deal with it. Please help me.
So whom did you turn to then?
Generally, I would turn to some of the women who had previously done the submarine JO tour, but they were, again, mostly all JOs, since by the time I had reported to my submarine, there weren't really any female department heads yet. And because I went to grad school right after the Naval Academy, I was 2 years behind the rest of my peers in terms of year groups. So I could just turn to them who had already been at their submarines for 2 years and say like, hey, Lieutenant so-and-so, who's my classmate, I'm having this problem. How did you deal with it? Luckily, the submarine women's network is really, really strong. I mean, there are Facebook groups and support groups to kind of answer all those frequently asked questions, or just provide a safe forum for women to ask questions that maybe they don't know how to approach in their professional environment.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Does anybody else want to respond to, leading in a new environment where there may not be somebody who looks like you or maybe even thinks like you, and how you respond to that? And also, how do you learn from the people who are reporting to you?
Yes, I'll just expound a little bit on what was just talked about. So I, in 1997, I reported to the USS Constellation CV-64, which has been decommissioned. So dating myself a little bit, but there were 11 of us female officers. We were all ensigns. So we reported aboard the aircraft carrier, really, really big ship. And I tell you, it was a lot of times, you know, what we did is we bound together. We were really strong together because a lot of our male counterparts were just afraid to even talk to us. So we had to, you know, kind of say, hey, it's okay. We're sailors just like you, trying to learn, and maybe and open up that conversation so that there was a comfort level that, okay, they are out here to learn and do, and they're not, you know, something that I have to, you know, be cautious with. So I think once we established ourselves, and I tell you, we were just such a mighty group together, and we would definitely lean on each other, but we made it so that I think a lot of the crew felt like, oh, here's my sister. And we were like, hey, we got a bunch of brothers. And I'll tell you another instance for me, when I was on board the USS Cleveland, LP, another ship that has been decommissioned, I was the only female on board that ship for the first 3 months of deployment because they weren't outfitted for females. And initially, it was one of those situations where, well, I have my own bathroom, I have my own washer dryer, I have my own stateroom. It wasn't bad. But you know, again, when something was said that might have been out of line or something that was a little, you know, off, you know, not professional, I would just course correct right then and there. Hey, I don't like that. Knock it off. Cut it out. And then, you know, it again ended up with like 300 brothers. So it was amazing. And a lot of it is just how you carry yourself, how you conduct yourself, because you are either perpetuating a stereotype or, you know, making it tougher for the next group. But definitely setting the standard. When they saw that, wait a minute, she's a sailor, just like the sailor over here. You can just feel the comfort level. And it really made it more of a functioning team.
Well, and now that we see that, you know, the integration of men and women is working quite well, or I'm saying that now that I see from what you said, I wonder if there are things that we can learn about different types of integration in the military, whether it has to do, again, moving from enlisted to officers, or if we think about race. Are there things that you could comment about?
So one of the things that I'll say, as the Women in Submarines coordinator now, I actually do have to look at a lot of the data for how integration is going, what sort of things have gone poorly, what sort of things have gone really well, and what we can do better. And one of the first studies that they read about and talked about as they were starting this like female integration was having at least, to Captain Hines' point, is she was one of the only female ensigns on USS Cleveland. One of the lessons learned from that was they tried to put women in groups of no less than 3 to provide that support group for each other, because putting like one lone wolf on a submarine can probably go really well, right? It's partly individual based, but it's also very it can be very isolating, especially if you don't have anybody that looks like you to talk to and bounce ideas off of, or, you know, commiserate with about something that happened on the boat. So yeah, putting women at least in groups of 3. Another big major thing that we took from the surface warfare community was having at least one of those women be a department head, so that they can provide at least some sort of at sea experience. Unfortunately, we didn't just like create submarine department heads out of thin air. So what we did was poach a lot of surface warfare supply officer department heads to come serve on ships, or on submarines, as second tour supply officers who had never before served on a submarine, but had served on a surface warfare ship. So,
well, I think that universities are facing the very same thing at this time in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. We see many more universities trying to figure out why we're not as diverse as we should be, why we don't represent the US population or the international population. And many universities are now trying to have cluster hires meaning they have a group of people who are similar. So you can have someone to chat with, someone to, just go and relax with, someone you can bounce ideas off. So I think it's the very same idea. Before I move into another area, I want to make sure that people know that they can, if they want to ask a question, they can put it into the chat. And later on, Ali Freimeyer is going to read off some of the questions. So I wanted to talk about the work-family life balance. And this has become very important in the US in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I personally try not to call it work-life balance, but work-life integration, because I don't like to play one off the other. But I wanted to ask you, or I wanted to make the comment that 2 weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal published an article about how the coronavirus crisis threatens to set back women's careers in industry, because many women, especially mothers, may have to step back or away from jobs because of the pandemic's impact on their lives. I did try to find some data about how this plays out in the military, but I couldn't find any. But what the corporate data suggests is, first of all, it impacts in particular non-white collar workers, I should say, women who have not really hit the executive levels. But it also suggests that household responsibilities typically falls on the women in industry, and that their safety net is really precarious, right? When kids are going back to school now, who's going to be home, who's going to stay with them? Often a partner may have a higher income. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about not necessarily the pandemic, but what has the Navy put in place that allows women like you to flourish in your careers? And are there things that you think that industry could learn from these practices? Or has the Navy put things in that allow you to flourish?
I think the Navy's done a lot of things at a corporate level. There is a chance to take a career break for a year or up to 2, and then you come back in with your groups behind you. I don't have any numbers behind it. I don't think it's been used that much. I think for me personally, I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old and a husband who just retired from active duty as a Hornet pilot. So for 22 years, we spent dual military. And I would say that I was allowed to flourish solely because of my community. So my husband as a pilot was one of many, many numbers. He was looked at as a number most of his career, even when he screened for command. I think the cryptologic warfare community is a lot smaller, and I greatly benefited from that. I think if I had been a different community, there's a good likelihood I wouldn't be a captain in the United States Navy today. And so I give a lot of credit to having a more flexible career path. For instance, when I was a lieutenant commander, the 4th officer rank, I did not deploy. I deployed as a lieutenant. And when I was a commander, I deployed back to back from Afghanistan, came home for 5 months and turned around and went out on an aircraft carrier. So they still got it all out of me, but they were very flexible in when I could do it, which allowed me to have kids and allowed me to be home when my husband was out on sea duty. So I think I had a sailor ask me, Carol, it was an interesting question because she just asked me the same thing about COVID. And I think in some senses, the military is very flexible because they want to keep you, and they offer a whole lot of services. They offer benefits and healthcare and lower cost childcare services. But in another sense, they're not flexible because at the end of the day, they're going to ask you to deploy. At some point, you're going to pull long hours and you're not going to see your family. I think in almost every specialty that we have. And so I guess it's really up to you individually. But I do think they offer kind of lifelines throughout. But there's no misunderstanding that if you do a significant amount of time in the military, it's not an easy career choice, and you're going to definitely spend time away from your family.
Yes, and just to pile on a little bit, if I may, like Captain Casey said, we have things like the career intermission program where people can, you at a certain time, say you want to plan to have a child, you can take a pause and then come back in. I think the Navy now is more conducive to family and career instead of family or career. And I've seen this morph over time. I spent a lot of time in San Diego where my son was born, went all the way through high school, and I stayed in the same geographical location. I chose different jobs. Of course, I had to deploy and such, but they really are trying, to make those accommodations. And just like we spoke briefly about, even the pandemic, we're as leaders thinking about, well, what are some reasonable accommodations that we need to make, given the school situations, to let people know, hey, we yes, there's mission out there, but sometimes there's a way we can kind of balance things to make sure that our sailors are getting the support that they need so that they want to retain. And I tell you, that's why I've been hanging around so long, is because the Navy has said, okay, well, yeah, you can go over here, you can do this. My husband, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but is not in the Navy. So it was a little easier because he just kind of packed up and came along. And then when I deployed, he was there with the kids. But I do see things changing again to where it is more conducive to family and career.
I would like to also add that the Navy has also extended the maternity leave for mothers, as well as extended that to the father as well. So they've given more time for parents to be able to basically enjoy that time away from work and embrace their new son or daughter into the world. They've also allowed parents to co-locate if they're dual military. I've been a single parent my whole time that I've been in the Navy, and I've been very fortunate that I have a good family support system to help me out. But in all throughout my career, the Navy has been flexible, and as I see dealing with sailors, we give them a lot of resources to help them out if they're having any issues family-wise. We have the Ombudsman program that helps bring families together when their families or their significant other is deployed or away from their permanent duty station.
Captain Lukic, do you want to add anything, or Lieutenant Reyes-Dodds?
Well, I'm single.
Oh, okay.
And that's been my choice. It's been reflective in my career. I took a lot of jobs that require that I deploy or had limited personal time, but that was my choice to do so. I do agree with the other panelists that the Navy does try to offer opportunities, although it's very hard to balance both.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll add is I definitely don't think that the Navy is more difficult for women or for men in terms of family work-life balance. I think it's equally difficult and equally easy for both men and women. I'm married to a fellow submariner, and the last 2 or 3 years when we were both at seagoing commands was very difficult because I spent probably 200 or 300 days at sea last year, and he was in port. And then as soon as I got back from deployment, his boat started working up for deployment. So it's something that you have to balance. We don't have kids or anything, so I couldn't speak to family planning, but I know the Navy does work with, especially the submarine community is trying to work with women extensively in terms of family planning and making sure that there are options available so that you can plan for a family and also be able to complete your like milestones in order to make commanding officer for a submarine. With that said, it's still a really, really difficult choice, and it's the reason that, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Well, when we think about the sort of transformation that's going on, one thing that the transformation due to the pandemic is that I know many universities, including ours, have a hybrid model. So I don't go in right now. I've been in once since March. And our work worlds have changed. And I'm wondering, have your work worlds changed? Do you think you can now work remotely, or is the material that you work on, you have to be in the actual center to work on the data?
I absolutely cannot work remotely. Almost actually every contract I have is classified. So there's a little bit in my command, there's some human resources that can work at home, and there's a little bit of finance, but I'd say a good 90% plus in my command requires access to classified data.
Yeah,
that's what I assumed.
Yeah, and I'll just say I do have, at least at the secret level, the capability to have a mobile mobile access to at least secret information, but what I do is at a higher level.
Yeah.
So we were on a 2-week, blue gold rotation, and it was extremely challenging. So we brought the most of the leadership team back full time, but no, I can't work remotely full time and be productive.
Thanks. Allie, I understand that there's a question in the chat.
There are. We have a couple from some of our graduate students. So thank you for being here, our IPS grad students. The first one is, currently the United States is in an economic recession due to the pandemic. With the US economy at a standstill, how will this affect the technological advancements of the military, particularly the Navy? Is there a way to trim the defense budget without harming US security?
Ooh, that's a doozy. I don't know that I can answer the whole defense budget. If there's a way to trim it, because I don't know exactly what goes into all of it. My initial take is that right now the Navy and the defense budget haven't been trimmed. So I guess on the surface of things, we should be able to accomplish the same missions we were before. I don't know if we can trim it or not. That's always a question, and it's a strategic one when you're talking about $718 billion budget a year.
And I'll just pile on a little bit. We are really working hard. Oh, am I still muted? Oh, we are really working hard to get the prioritization right. So we have to understand, on a tactical level, hey, what's really important? What do we really need, so that we can put the dollars in the right places. Definitely want to encourage innovation. And there are some things that we're working on that we said, hey, this one is a legacy thing. So let's make sure, instead of keeping that alive for forever and ever, let's invest in this new thing that'll help us, we'll get a greater return on investment. So I think what we're doing, there's going to be cuts. So it's really important for us to get the prioritization right at all levels. And this, of course, is beyond just us, but at the highest of government levels.
So our next question is going to come direct from our grad student herself, Gabriella Bettino. Over to you.
Okay, hi. So my question, it's more techie. So there's a lot of discussion lately about lethal autonomous weapon systems, and I know that the Navy uses its Aegis, I think, system for targeting and the like. I was just wondering what the opinion in the military community is, because I've seen a lot of discussions outside of it about these weapons being unethical, but do you see these weapons as being an asset or a threat to your operations?
No one wants to touch that one, so I'll just chime in. Yes and yes, because this is a new war, so you got to figure out how to outmaneuver and outsmart the enemy. So there's always risks that have to be weighed, but that's why we got to make sure we do have the real smart people in the room, so that we know what we're getting ourselves into, because you got to think about the enemy and what they may have, and it is a different type of a war fight. So while a lethal autonomous weapon has some punch with it, there are some risks, and that's the thing that needs to be weighed when we're trying to meet whatever that objective is.
And I think if we're realistic, the adversary is most likely going down the same path. So it would be foolish of us, in my opinion, to not consider that type of technology. We could fight ethical battles a lot, but unless, the mines went through that for a long time, right? Biological warfare weapons have gone through that. Unless there's an international kind of convention ruling on the ethical side of the autonomous weapons, then if your enemy is building it, you have to at least consider what it is and how to counter it. It's not my area of expertise. I don't build those, but I would say behind anything, when we say the word autonomous, there is a command and control behind it. So there's lots of decisions going into making before the weapon can do anything on its own. And often, even if we make something autonomous, we put it in a manual mode, and then we can throw it into the autonomous mode if we need to, but we are usually very conservative and we want the human to make the decision.
Thank you. Our next question is a little bit changing gears a little bit. So far, the Navy has been the only service to give a waiver to a transgender individual since the start of the transgender ban in the military. Should the other services follow the Navy's lead? And do you think the ban is a step back in terms of integration?
I think,
I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just say, the Navy is diverse. So are the other branches of services. I think what we are looking for when someone enlists in Navy is someone who is going to apply themselves, provide some new knowledge, serve their country to the best of their ability, regardless of what they look like, what gender they decide to be identified as. That would be up to the other services on whether, they incorporate that. But I look at a person as an individual, serving their country.
Well said, Senior Chief. And I was just going to say, I think right now as leaders, we do have to follow our Commander-in-Chief. And if the President says it's not allowed at this point, then that's where we all are. None of us have the authority to change a decision that he makes.
Thank you. We have a question specifically for Captain Casey. Ma'am, do you anticipate the Navy placing more resources into cyber development anytime in the near future? And what would you recommend an ensign in grad school be working on now to better serve the Navy at NCWDG later?
I would love for the Navy to invest more resources in cyber. And one of my jobs as an acquisition command is I fight for those resources all the time. I do think there is a focus on it. I think in a broad sense, yes, the Navy is investing more in cyber. That's not a specific answer. And so when you talk about cyber, it's not all offensive. There's a lot of blue force defensive work to be done. And so we have to have good, secure communications ourselves in the first place, all the way from ground stations to satellite communications. And so those are all expensive, and there's a lot of work done on that side too. But I think the budget certainly has put more today in cyber than we ever have in the past. And it's also not at a Navy level, it's at a joint level. So you saw U.S. Cyber Command stand up as a sub-unified command maybe 10 or so years ago, and then recently 3 years ago as a unified combatant command. And I don't think, I think there's a definite reason behind that. For NICWEDGE, we like to say everything is an acronym. We say the acronym is a word in the Navy. So that's a little bit of Navy ease for you. At my command, skill set wise, I take intel specialists, I take acquisition specialists, and I take engineers. And on the engineering side, you can be a programmer, cyber warfare, specifically like a coder, or you could be more of an electrical engineer or a mathematician, a physicist. I use all of those skill sets, active duty and civilian.
I was thinking about the question that the student just asked, and why, can you give a reason why a student who's not going through ROTC should really consider looking to the Navy for their career? That I'm thinking specifically about the students who are in your areas of information, cybersecurity, electrical and computing engineering, computer science, politics, cybersecurity. What can they get in a career in the Navy in terms of access to resources that they wouldn't be able to get, let's say, in industry?
Oh man, I mean, I could talk about that all day long, but I will tell you that when I was a midshipman at the Naval Academy, we had a 5-year commitment upon graduation, and I would have told everybody I met that I was doing my 5 years and getting out. And that was 23 years ago when I commissioned. So it's interesting, it's exciting. Those are probably kind of cliches. I will say the camaraderie in the Navy is nothing like I've seen anywhere else. When you deploy and you're you're somewhere within 1,000 feet of everybody else on that platform. You learn how to fight. You learn how to do some pretty hard jobs through the long hours of the night. And I think Captain Lukic could probably add some and speak to that as well. Of course, there's a lot of other benefits that you don't see right away, or maybe you don't understand when you're 18 to 22. Certainly healthcare is phenomenal. It's fully paid for, including all of your dependents. There's a GI Bill after you serve a couple years, and that pays for up to 36 full months. So whether that's 4 years of 9 months, or you know, you want to go straight through the summer. So that's phenomenal, and can be passed on to your dependents if you serve the right number of years. So I guess that would probably be my answer. I just found it super exciting.
Thank you. Captain Lukic, did you want to
Sure.
add?
Yeah. I certainly have the same feeling that Captain Casey did after I graduated from the Naval Academy, thinking after 5 years, I would find something else I would think would be more interesting, and that just hasn't happened yet. I think my service in the Navy has just given me opportunities personally to lead in different ways that I didn't anticipate, even when I graduated from the Naval Academy. Being able to work independently in very remote locations in combat zones, and having the trust and confidence from my commanding officers to make decisions at that level. And then being in charge of small units and very large units, and leading and guiding people are things that I don't think folks in my age groups at those times felt they had the opportunities to do in the civilian sector. And that's, you know, that's the driving part, that's the camaraderie, that's the sense of leadership that everybody talks about in the military. But certainly I felt that way. And then the variety of different jobs that I've been afforded in my career has really kept my interest. So as an intelligence officer, we have a lot of flexibility in our careers of what kind of tracks we would like to take. Everybody has certain milestones that they must make, but there's flexibility within those certain milestones in the career. So we like to joke that if you don't like one job, just wait till the next job, you can pick something else and do something completely different. And that's just like, it's a professional attention deficit disorder sometimes. You have that flexibility to change, but you also get opportunities to work in locations that you would have no expectation that you'd be able to see. So I just, those are the things that have kept me going, and that I have always told folks that I would recommend considering service in the military.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, you get to see the world. You truly do. It's fun.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask now Commander Christoph if he would like to add to this conversation. He's kind enough to help me prepare for it, and I imagine he has some questions he'd like to ask our panelists.
Yeah, I do have a question, because we talked a lot about some of the positive policies and programs that helped integrate, you know, both gender integration and racial integration. And I wonder if there's any policies that you've observed over your careers that didn't work and that you would recommend other institutions steer away from, like maybe pitfalls that could be avoided.
I'd like to go back to that recommendation of groups of 3. The Navy is figuring that out now, that it's a good idea to have groups of 3, and it's also a good idea to have a senior woman. When I was a midshipman on my summer cruises, we would be sent out in groups of like 20 or so women to a ship that's never had women on board. And that was a shock to the system for that ship, trying to accommodate us. And then we didn't really have anybody senior that was kind of mentoring the way. So I would just reinforce some of those things. You know, in my career too, I've served as the only female officer, and like probably like the first half of my career, and I was commissioned in 1999. And so being the only one, there's a lot of pressure that's associated with that. But one thing I don't think it's talked about enough is having those male advocates for women. We often get asked, you know, have you had a female mentor or advocate in your career? And my answer has been no. And not until I was more senior did I even have a female that I worked with or for. But I was really fortunate. I always had a male advocate, typically my commanding officer, that looked out for me and encouraged me and promoted me to do things that I felt like were outside of my comfort zone. And the other thing that I've learned is having that kind of middle level senior manager who has the inside track of information. So as a minority in a command, you know, there's a communication loop between, I'm just going to say, male colleagues because they know each other and they have the inside gouge of information that's happening in the command. That if you're outside of that communication loop, you don't get that information. And so not having an advocate within that group that brings you into that group to get that insider information, it's just, imagine like insider trading in business world. You got to have that insider trading information. So I really encourage women when they are junior in rank to find, if they don't have a female that they are using as their mentor in their immediate workplace, look for advocates that are in that middle group that give you that grist, that information that's happening in the command that maybe you don't hear about. And then don't hesitate to go and get a mentor who happens to be a male, because there are some really great ones out there that want to advocate for women.
Does anybody else have any reflections on their experience with mechanisms for integration that worked or did not work?
Well, I'll just say we're still trying to get our uniforms right. And I don't know if it's working or not, but we've shifted a lot, and we're trying to be uniform. So I actually like now that all the sailors wears the standard, you know, I'll just say the Cracker Jack uniform. Man, it looks awesome, both on men and women. But we've shifted a little bit, so hopefully we can find that common ground, because there's been some times where there's certain you know, pants that just don't fit my body type right. So hopefully we can just put more, you know, attention on getting that right. And not shifting around so much. But I've seen that work and I've seen that not work. I don't know how I feel about the new cover. It hurts my head, but my husband said it looks sharp. So.
I was complaining about these pants for the service dress blues today. So that's funny. The only other one I've seen change, I don't know if I have enough data to say it didn't work, but we went, I think Senior Chief brought this up earlier. When I had my children, we had 6 weeks of maternity leave. And that went to Senior, you might remember, we're at 12 now, but we went higher, like 20 or something. And I think the Navy backed off actually of that 20 and came back down to 12. And where they were trying to find the balance between letting a new mom be home and, you know, having the mission impact of having somebody out for months and months. And so they certainly backed off of that, but I didn't experience it. So I'm not sure if we would call it a failure, except that Navy leadership decided it was too much maternity leave.
Well, I haven't heard any complaints from the sailors that I've served with, so I think they like it, because that 6-week turnaround went by so quick that I was just, yeah, it was short.
Yeah, one's hormones haven't actually re-registered even after 6 weeks. It's I can't imagine having to go back and do some physical activities so quickly.
On the topic of pregnancy and maternity leave, I think something that the Navy can do better is kind of the social impact and the social culture in which the way the Navy treats pregnancy, not so much systematically, but how other sailors treat sailors who are pregnant. I feel like it can have a really negative connotation for some sailors to say like, hey, I got pregnant while on my sea duty, or even some sailors who get pregnant on their shore duties and then being accused by other sailors that they're just getting pregnant on their shore duties to do as little work as possible. I don't think that's the case. I think most women are getting pregnant either because they want to start a family or because it was an accident, and sometimes it happens, even with various means of birth control. But there's still a pretty negative connotation, at least in my experience, of women getting pregnant in the Navy and then them being accused of not wanting to do work or doing it for some nefarious reason other than starting a family.
I think that's interesting, because I think that's also a problem too in industry for some women too. Not that they're accused of getting pregnant to not do something, but it changes their career path.
Absolutely.
And it can sort of, and some women then choose to exit, the workplace too at that time. I see the time. I want to make sure that I'm mindful of our schedule. I also know students have to go back to classes. We're on an extended schedule at CMU to accommodate our students around the world, and also to make sure those who are in classrooms are in clean classrooms, so they get cleaned between sessions. So I was wondering if any of you had some final thoughts that you would like to talk about the role of leadership and technology. Something you want to impart great thoughts to our students and to me.
I think one of the last things I'll say, as a leader, I think one of the biggest things that you can do is be prepared. So in order to be proactive and not reactive, you have to know your adversary, know your capabilities, know their capabilities, and then know how you stand in relation to their capabilities, whether you're at parity, whether you have an advantage or a disadvantage, and in what different sectors, because maybe we overall have an advantage against Russia or China, but they might have technological capabilities that exceed ours. So we need to know what those are, and then what we can do to combat them, or what our strengths are that can get around those. So being prepared, knowing your adversary, knowing all of your, being a technical expert in what you do, and then understanding the big picture and being able to pull all of the different systems that you're an expert at together to understand the whole picture, gather all your information, and then make real-time decisions based on that.
Thank you.
And I'll just add that, I'm sorry.
No, please.
I'm very excited about artificial intelligence. I think these are exciting times. I think, and I can't remember the book I was reading about this, but then, somebody's got to be behind that, because there's a reasoning part of it that I don't know that we all have figured out. So leaders still need to lead. You still need to make sure the mission is clear as we have these good, great technologies to help us get there. There's certain things that we haven't figured out yet. So I don't want to stifle it. I want to keep it going, but I still need to make those good leadership decisions so we know which pieces that we're picking for, to meet our objectives. But these are exciting times. So create, but there still has to be someone there to say, wait a minute, if this all fails or if the lights go out, I still need to be able to make a decision.
Well, before I turn the mic back to Allie, I want to thank Senior Chief Dulux, Captain Casey, Captain Hines, Captain Lukic, and Lieutenant Reyes Dawes. This has been a thrill for me. And I also want to, of course, thank Commander Christoph, too, for his time at Carnegie Mellon. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Allie.
Thanks, Professor Goldberg. I'm going to echo your thanks to everyone on the panel today. It was a pleasure to get to hear you speak, and to Clint for all of your help in pulling all of this together. Our next event is next Wednesday, same time, 4:45. We are welcoming Jennifer Buckner, who is retired Brigadier General and former Director of Cyber at Army. She's going to join us to talk about cyber operations from her perspective as a military practitioner. So I do hope you can all join us for that. Again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to Professor Goldberg for moderating this discussion today. And I hope you all have a really wonderful evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.